Welcome back. I went through all 32 NFL teams to figure out exactly how the coaches affect your fantasy football team. Today's episode, the Kansas City Chiefs. So let's take a seat, class is in session. First, we need to identify if there's been any coaching changes. For the Chiefs, they actually switched offensive coordinators. They upgraded Matt Nagy. He specializes in quarterbacks in theory, and Andy Reid particularly specializes in offensive lines and tight ends. Then we have Steve Spagnuolo running the defense, primarily specializing in defensive backs and linebackers. More than likely, I pronounced that wrong. From how this team addressed the offseason, there's theoretically reason for concern. They lost both of their tackles, which is a little bit of a red flag for me, but considering Andy Reid is the coach, you can't really get too much behind that. And looking at the draft and free agency, they theoretically filled these holes. Considering there's definitely some developmental pieces, it's not the worst thing in the world when you do have Andy Reid as your head coach. Now that we've laid the foundation for exactly how the Chiefs have attacked this offseason, we can start to identify exactly how the coaches affect our various fantasy football teams. But before we do that, we need to check with the guys upstairs to see exactly how they have the Kansas City Chiefs to go about this season. I mean, no surprise, the Kansas City Chiefs are supposed to get somewhere between 11 and 12 wins, realistically erring on more of the side of optimism, and supposed to go first in their division. Let's not overthink it. Let's not overtalk it. That's likely where they will land. There's only two reasons for concern here. Super Bowl hangover and the super difficult schedule that they have this year. I'm not going to even try to go against consensus on this one. Patrick Mahomes is Timothy, but I do think he's a little overpriced in drafts. And I only say that because I don't want to spend my second round draft capital entirely on a quarterback. I can get better value later. Now that we've got a really strong understanding of the general direction in which the Kansas City Chiefs are built towards this season, we can now figure out exactly how Andy Reid and Matt Nagy effectively affect our overall fantasy football teams. Starting off with the quarterback, Patty Mahomes. I mean, both of these trends point towards a 20 fantasy point per game average. That's not going to deviate too far from what Patrick Mahomes actually produces. But I do think we're going to see a little bit of regression here coming in with Matt Nagy as the overall offensive coordinator. Yes, I know Andy Reid calls the plays, but Matt Nagy is still going to have an effect. And if we look at his overall coaching trend, it's in a downtrend. So factoring in Super Bowl hangover and theoretical cause for regression from a QB1 season, because it's very difficult to repeat that over and over and over again, I think a 20 fantasy point base makes a lot of sense here. Still makes him the top fantasy quarterback this year, still top 5 realistically, just not number 1 again. And then you're probably going to look at this and be like, oh my gosh, why is he theoretically regressing off Super Bowl, blah, blah, blah. Peyton Manning was QB1 one year, and then he was the QB5 the next. I think there's going to be a similar pattern with someone like Patrick Mahomes. And when you cross-reference the coaching data, it makes a lot of sense. Moving over to the RB1, and that is Isaiah Pacheco. This is a guy I think that is extremely undervalued, and it could be an absolute smash for fantasy this year. Yes, you're seeing a lot of volatility on these spikes, but something that I've noticed that I think you can see off of the data here as well, is that once they've suffered enough of a theoretical downtrend, they smack really high back up. And considering where you can purchase him at the second in time, he is way too undervalued, especially in an offense that theoretically is going to have a really strong game script for these overall running backs. Like, let's be honest here. Do you really think that Patrick Mahomes is going to be losing games? Yes, he'll lose a few. But more often than not, I see them being in front. Which means that Isaiah Pacheco is going to be running between the tackles and making plays happen. So for me, I'm going to go with a 17 fantasy point per game floor. Yes, that's extremely bullish, but going off of where he's going in drafts and everything, it makes a lot of sense. Remember, we want to find top-tier offensive lines, which it realistically looks like they honestly did the more I think about it. And that creates a really strong overall sense of where we can get Isaiah Pacheco going. Moving over to RB2, and that is going to be Jerick McKinnon. Yes, this also points towards an uptrend, and I think a 10 fantasy point per game floor makes a lot of sense here, honestly. You got a guy that was very effective in the passing game when they really kind of couldn't figure out who was going to be the true RB1 for them, and he made it work. Do I think we're going to see an extreme level of utilization out of this year? No, because I'm also projecting that Isaiah Pacheco is going to have a massive leap upwards. But in general, as kind of a collective, I'm very optimistic about Jerick McKinnon's value as well, so I think that 10 fantasy point per game floor makes a lot of sense. Moving over to the wide receiver 1, who I think is going to be Kadarius Toney. A lot of people are bearish on him, and I can understand why. You've been burned on him too many times. It happens. Going off of the coaching totals and the theoretical cross-referencing we can do, and the performance that we actually have been able to see from Kadarius Toney, I think a 17 fantasy point floor is a very safe reality for someone like him. He has had a full entire offseason to actually learn the offense. And his quarterback is Patrick Mahomes. I don't know, just kind of being thrusted in there to theoretically make plays happen and be this gadget guy that everyone's considering him to be, I just don't think that's a true reality. I think you have a guy who's really spent this whole entire offseason actually learning how to play with Patrick Mahomes, and we're going to see a lot of really nice plays made out of him this year. I am a Florida guy, so take that into some consideration, but also consider I am very bearish on Kyle Pitts still. I don't know, when you have the GM as well being like, Kadarius Toney's going to be that guy, I think Kadarius Toney is likely going to be that guy this year. Albeit he is a bit made of glass, but kid's a monster, man. He's going to be great. Moving over to the wide receiver 2, and I think that's probably going to be MVS. This position is clearly on an uptrend, and I think a 10 to 11 fantasy point projection for the wide receiver 2 makes a lot of sense here. My only concern is that we would have theoretically seen a lot more utilization out of MVS if he truly was going to be that kind of guy for them. But I also think there's a decent reality that he's just more going to be the theoretical speed guy, but we'll see how that works out. I think the wide receiver 1 is obviously going to perform better than wide receiver 2, but I think that every single sort of Kansas City Chiefs piece is going way too cheap in drafts right now. But people are taking Patrick Mahomes in the second round. Travis Kelce, yes, I get it. He's a first round pick, and that's theoretically going to be his main guy consistently, but like, Tyreek Hill was there too, and he was just as efficient, if not more. Obviously, that's a deviation from the wide receiver 2 that we're talking about here, but I think that's kind of a safe projection in theory. Moving over to the wide receiver 3, and that's theoretically going to be Sky Moore. Potentially, they want to get him more involved, but I just don't see it. I think a 7 to 8 fantasy point per game projection makes a lot of sense here just because I'm not a true Sky Moore believer like a lot of other people are. I'm not going to get sucked into training camp hype until I actually see him truly getting targeted by Patrick Mahomes all the time. And the guy that no one can disrespect, and that is their tight end, Travis Kelce. As a monster. No other way to put it around it. 15 fantasy point floor for this guy is the bare minimum. I think based off statistics, we will see a slight bit of regression, but we'll see how that all works. At this point in time, I'm honestly convinced that Travis Kelce is probably the best tight end of all time. I mean, to put it simply, this team is going to be absolutely elite, but I think you're getting a lot of value in some of the facets that other people are overlooking at this point in time in terms of draft capital. Like, I'm expecting a big jump from Isaiah Pacheco and Kadarius Toney specifically, and I think those are the guys that you really should be targeting more than anything in your fantasy football drafts. Like, we also got to think about the overall ebb and flow to a lot of these things. If in theory that Patrick Mahomes is going to be in a lot more battles from a quarterback standpoint, then the wide receiver 1's overall production should be able to skyrocket. I'm aware that Travis Kelce is truly that wide receiver 1 in that offense, but I don't think they went out and got a guy like Kadarius Toney just to say, oh, we got Kadarius Toney. I think they can make him work. And if you watch the specific interview about how Andy Reid went about like Travis Kelce and theoretically like made him who he is today to some extent, he's able to handle anyone. So to some extent, I'm telling you to stay away from Patrick Mahomes in fantasy drafts, but if you want to buy him, like, I don't blame you. He's still going to be elite. And he's got an amazing Week 17 matchup and theoretically Burrowhead. So that's going to be a really fun one. I know that's going to be a little bit of a great game, to put it simply. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Drop comments down below so I can answer all your guys' fantasy football questions. Drop a like if you enjoyed the content. Subscribe if you want to see what episode we're doing tomorrow. That is going to be on the Los Angeles Chargers. But in the meantime, peace.